think Professor Eberle needs little introduction here at Aquinas College. He's served since 1987 in both a staff and a faculty capacity. He's a highly prolific and highly regarded writer. He's a longtime chair of the English department, although he did leave that duty behind this year. And he's also been a longtime member and really a faithful laborer on the Aquinas College Historical Commission, and has done quite a lot of the legwork behind our Heritage and Traditions website. And so he's someone who's committed a great deal of his own personal time to helping us know our tradition better as a college, and he's going to share some of that with us now. So thank you very much, Gary.
Thank you. I actually arrived here in 1982, and am, I guess, entering my 28th year, and I've just about done it all. I came in as a part-time tutor, and then I became an administrator for a few years, and then came on the faculty in '87. I've also taken classes here as a student for the fun of it, and my son is entering his 5th year, so I've seen it from a parent's perspective as well. And so what I'd like to do this afternoon is speak as a member of the President's Committee on Mission, which is newly forming, and also then as chairman of the Historical Commission, which was formed 15 years ago by the board to sort of keep the mission and the history of the college alive in folks who are new to the place. And what I'd like to talk about today is the fact that there is no such place as Aquinas College, that there are many Aquinas colleges, and in the different capacities and offices I've had here, I realize that wherever your office is becomes the center of your Aquinas College. A student going through in the sciences sees a lot of Albertus Hall, very little of the Art and Music Center. And so Aquinas College is many colleges and many experiences of a college. It also is not a place. It's as much a place as it is a when. And when you were here, you may have experienced quite a different Aquinas College, depending on your place in the history of the place. So what I'd like to do today is back up almost 125 years, not quite as far as Sister Diane went, and bring us forward and then look ahead into the future. So we'll start, since I am a professor, with a quiz. When was Aquinas College founded? Was it 1886, 1887, 1922, 1931, 1940, 1945, or G, all of the above? How many would say all of the above? All right, you're sort of correct. If we take the T-shirt evidence in the bookstore, we see that the school was founded in 1886. If we look at the State of Michigan historical marker in the center of campus, we see that since 1887, the Novitiate School of the Sisters of Dominican. If we look at the cornerstone on AB, we see 1922. And if we look at the Holmdene plaque, the first mention of Aquinas College is 1945. Now, why the confusion? Because Aquinas College grew out of a small institution that Sister Diane mentioned, and that was the Novitiate Normal School of the Grand Rapids Sisters, Dominican Sisters. The Normal School in the 1800s meant a school that taught the norms that were to be taught in the grade in the high school. That's where that name comes from. So it doesn't mean normal in the sense of ordinary, it means normative school. And that's what they learned, and their mission was very clear, and it was very focused, and their intended audience was also very focused. In 1922, that mission had expanded, and in 1922, the first lay women, non-Dominican women, were admitted to Sacred Heart College. In 1931, that morphed into Grand Rapids Catholic Junior College, which, this is one of those qualifications, the first Catholic coeducational college in the United States run by women, I think, is the full qualification of that, but still some distinction for that time period. And then in 1940, that morphed into the four-year school known as Aquinas College, which was downtown, and then moved to this campus in 1945. So what you have in talking about the history of this place is something like the philosopher's shovel. Any of you have old tools, you know that you work with a shovel for a while and the handle breaks, and you buy a new handle and you install it. and then you use that for a while, and the blade gets dull or breaks, and you change the blade, and so now you've got a new handle and a new blade, but after a year or two, it feels like the same old shovel. Now, same thing happens in the history of an institution, is that there's constant change, and yet there's continuity as well. And that's, I think, the challenge of any institution, is to keep the continuity of your past while innovating into the present. And I hope to show a little bit of how we did that by dividing the history of the college up into 3 phases or periods. And this is not completely arbitrary, but it is my own interpretation. And so I'm going to be including some stuff. My sources are the archival material that went into the oral history project of 10 years ago, and then stuff I have done in the interim developing the Heritage and Tradition website. I would say the first phase of the college lasted from about 1886 to 1968. And during that period, the institution was very focused, and it had a unified vision and a unified curriculum. The students fit a pretty unified demographic, as did the faculty. What happened after 1968 was diversification and growth, and then sliding into crisis in the late 80s and the early 90s that we're still reeling from to a certain extent. The third phase is one that we're in the process of beginning right now, and that's the future. Where are we going next? If we think about those 3 time frames, I think that it'll help us to get a handle on where you and I fit into this place we call Aquinas College, and then how we can move ourselves into the 21st century. At least that's my goal. So our origins. I thought Diane did a marvelous job of explaining the sisters coming to West Michigan from New York in the 1880s, realizing the need for educating their sisters to go into the various schools in Michigan, coming down here and founding the Novitiate Normal School. And for the first 30 years or so, the students were all Dominican sisters in training, the faculty pretty much all Dominican sisters as well. And the mission was to train teachers to teach in the schools that the Grand Rapids Dominican Sisters filtered out into throughout Michigan. Somewhere in here was the founding, I think, of Marywood, and then Sacred Heart, the Marywood Academy, which was a high school, and then Sacred Heart College, which admitted lay women in 1922. And in the 9 years that Sacred Heart existed, the students were only women, but Mother Evelyn Mackey was involved with a discussion and encouragement from the bishop of the diocese, Joseph Pinton, to turn Sacred Heart College into Grand Rapids Catholic Junior College. And here's where we get, at least as far as I can tell, the first tension between diocese and order. And Bishop Pinton felt that it was his college, and the Dominican sisters felt that it was theirs. And the difference, without a very short, sketchy and caricature of how this works in the Catholic Church, is that the diocesan chain of command, as it were, goes from the parish level, the priest, the bishop, the archbishop, the cardinal, the pope. The congregations, like the Jesuits and the Dominicans, have their own governance structure, if you will, and their own chain of command, which ultimately goes to the pope as well. And so, similar to the military having one commander-in-chief, I think one way of understanding this is that we have branches of the secular clergy and the so-called regular clergy, and that tension between them goes back at least 1,000 years, if not more. So we're still feeling that. Now, Mother Evelyn, I didn't know her obviously, but held her ground. And finally, the bishop conceded that Catholic Junior College was autonomous from his direct control. The board of trustees of the college was exclusively composed of the governing body of the Grand Rapids Dominicans. No lay involvement or non-Dominican involvement at that time. So the line between the college and the sisters was very thin during this period. Then the first lay faculty are hired under Dr. Burton Confrey. The faculty were still primarily Dominicans, and for those of you trying to figure out the economics of Aquinas College, and you hear the term living endowment, what that meant was the faculty were paid virtually nothing because as part of their mission as Dominican sisters, they were offering their services to the college. The result was that the payroll line, which is now, of course, the largest line in the college's budget, was very, very tiny during these years, and really up through the 1960s, so that we could afford to do things as a college that we can't do when everyone's being paid full salary. Does that make sense? So that's part of our institutional DNA, if you will. It's built into our tradition, for good and bad. Mother Evelyn seems to have been an extraordinary woman. She encouraged the sisters to get their PhDs. She sent Sister Mildred Hawkins overseas and Sister Bertrand Lalonde to Europe to get PhDs at European universities. They came back here to Aquinas College and taught. And it was during the period of the junior college days that Father Arthur Bukowski was sent by the bishop to be chaplain, and I'm not sure how, but he also became a dean. And I don't know if he was accepted by the sisters, appointed by the sisters, but that was the connection. He was a diocesan priest, not a Dominican priest. The school was housed down on what is now the parking lot of Grand Rapids Public Library on Ransom Street. And this was the whole shot. It was a couple of offices, 4 classrooms, 4 labs, a tiny library. If they had a gathering that had more than a few people, they needed to go across the street to the Knights of Columbus Hall and borrow space. And I guess there was also room up on this top level over here for a couple of houses for students. The student body, as you might imagine, was quite small, and by the mid-1930s, it was only about 200 students. Tuition was $50 a semester, if you could afford it, and not everybody could. So a lot of the student employees, like the library workers, were actually working for the federal government on the WPA program back during those days. And only 2 sports and an associate degree, basketball and baseball, the 2 oldest sports at Aquinas. Now, here's where I think I would like to start talking about the when of Aquinas College, mattering. Think about that group, 200 students, some faculty. It was very implicit what the mission of the college was. They didn't have, as far as I can tell, an explicit mission statement like we do. Everybody simply understood it. And it was Catholic higher education, not any other kind. And the status of Catholics during that period of the 1930s was quite different than it has been since the 1960s, in that it was perceived as a minority group within Protestant America. There was a lot of anti-Catholic discrimination. The Klan had as one of its targets Catholics and so on. And so coming out of the Catholic school system on the lower levels, they felt the need to form higher education in a Catholic way. So I think they understood then what Catholic meant in a way that since Vatican II and since the last 20 years, we're not sure anymore. It was simply a unified vision that we don't have. The curriculum was also very unified. It was a liberal arts core with Catholic theology within the core requirements, and it was fairly unified. Not a lot of choices in terms of what you could study for this 2-year degree. The leadership of the college was synonymous with the leadership of the Grand Rapids Dominicans. The prioress, as I understand it, was simply understood to be the leader and president of this college. And then there were no lay members on the board for quite a while after this in the college's history. The faculty were mainly Dominican and being compensated because, thanks to their vow of poverty, they became the living endowment, enabling the college to do things that better endowed colleges could do by virtue of the money that they had and that we didn't have. And also they're doing all this, if you feel bad during the Great Recession, they're getting this place going during the Great Depression after 1929. And so a very bold move on their part to start up a new institution during this period of economic depression. Now, it didn't take long after 1931 for them to begin lobbying with North Central to turn it into a 4-year school, which happened by 1940. But it stayed in the same building downtown called Aquinas College. Father Bukowski was named president, and Sister Mildred was directress of studies, or the position we would today call the provost or academic vice president. 1942, 2 years after the founding, they had some of the GRC Catholic Junior College students graduate 2 years later, and the first graduating class of Aquinas College with bachelor's degrees consisted of 5 men and 3 women, 8 students. It's a very small operation. You can see how our growth period is really going to happen after the 1960s. Over half of our graduates, as I understand it, have graduated from Aquinas College since the mid-70s. We have a very young alumni base. Gen Ed requirements, we're up to 70 hours. They're currently about 50-something here. And of those 70 hours, it included either Latin or Greek, which you had to take, and a pretty heavy dose of Catholic theology. In addition, students during this period were required to attend an annual retreat that took place right at this time of year between the semesters. Catholic students were required, but virtually all the students were Catholic. Such traditional Catholic events as a May crowning took place on Mary Day in May, and the Feast of Thomas was celebrated on March 7th. So the Catholic culture of the college was much more, what we'd say, interpenetrated with the daily life of the college than it will be later on. 1945, okay, this story that I'm going to tell you is way too good to let pass into mere folklore, so let's assume that it's true. Sister Mildred came up to this property, which at the time was the University of Grand Rapids. The Lowe family let go of the property in the late 1930s, and a for-profit educational group called the University of Grand Rapids settled in here for a couple of years. Sister Mildred came up from downtown and buried religious medals on campus, went back downtown and asked the community to pray for a special intention. Within a year, the University of Grand Rapids went belly up. And the sisters, with the help of a couple of bankers in town, were able to take a $115,000 loan and buy this 60-acre property that had been the Lowe estate. And there's a whole separate history of that available through Marty's office on a DVD that we produced for the 100th anniversary of the building called Holmdene. This whole estate was called Holmdene, though, not just the building. Now, what maybe, if you're a rationalist, what really sunk the University of Grand Rapids, of course, was World War II and the dearth of male students. But after the war, Aquinas begins to pick up enrollment. And so a lot of returning GIs Catholic GIs returned to Aquinas. They're older, they're more mature, they're living off campus. The downtown property was maintained for about 10 years, and students rented apartments off campus on Lake Drive and Sigsbee, and there's a story in the oral history of 38 male students living in one block of Sigsbee Street, not far from here. But unlike what you might think today, many of them were vets, and they were just out of World War II, and so they would get up in the morning, gather as a troop, haul the young 18-year-old male students who were also living on the block out of bed and march them to campus, keeping the esprit de corps. The college enters the 50s under the leadership of Monsignor Bukowski, and I'm going to throw a lot of change up here now, but a lot of new buildings and that sort of thing on campus. But I think what it carried through from the Catholic junior college days was a unified and implicit mission statement. It had a Catholic focus. Theology, Catholic theology, and philosophy were in the core. Walter Farrell's commentary on the Summa seems to have been required reading for virtually every student that went through here. Retreats were required of all Catholic students. There was the Marian Congress, which was held every year, and this would draw, I think the top number was 3,500 people came to campus to attend an outdoor mass and this several-day celebration of Mary within the church. On an average year, they would gather about 2,000 people. The student body, primarily white, Grand Rapids area Catholics, and then Catholic students coming from the various schools that the Dominican Sisters ran in other parts of Michigan. The faculty, primarily Dominican nuns and priests, but as the school expands, we begin to get lay faculty as well. and it had a diocesan priest as president. The core included 18 hours of theology and 12 hours of philosophy. That's 30 hours right there. Currently we have one theology course, one philosophy, maybe if you want to take philosophy. We'll find out why that happened. 1953, the business degree was added to the liberal arts choices. But the school remained primarily during this period liberal arts. In a word, it was a pre-Vatican II Catholic college. On the left there you see the one of the Marian Congresses procession. Everybody's in cap and gown academic regalia. Sorry, that's on the right. On the left, we see a May crowning. For those of you who didn't grow up in the Catholic Church, this is a traditional and beautiful event, and you can see that everything's quite formal, and we're going to make a transition in a few moments. As Sister Diane was talking about the embodied nature of Catholicism, I think we find it in these kinds of processionals and very dramaturgical events that were simply taken for granted as part of Catholic life. The best symbol that I know of this period is the number of bathrooms in AB. There were 6 categories of bathroom. Okay, you had male Dominican faculty, so the priests, the sisters had their own set of bathrooms. Lay male faculty had another bathroom, lay female faculty, another bathroom, male students and female students. Now, why bring that in? Because there's obviously, it was a time in the 50s of very distinct boundaries, very distinct hierarchies. All that's going to disappear when my generation arrives in the 60s. And I'm not sure it was all good or bad, but it's what happened. Okay. And it's important to understand the history of the college. Also, they had confidence enough, life went on, to do some expansion. 1955, what we now call the academic building was the administration building, and when they peel the ivy off, you can see that carved. That building, which is shaped like a T, was originally designed to be shaped like an E. And the 2 wings that would have gone off the ends, and then the middle wing that's still there, one of those wings would have been the library, and the other was planned to be a very large chapel. And in our tradition, we ran out of money. But it was a great plan. And it would have neatly balanced architecturally the academic and the intellectual and the prayerful. So I think that architecture could have been quite interesting. 1960, Albertus Hall was built, and you had a lot of scenes like the one in the lower right-hand corner with the sisters out there breaking ground with bankers. The House of Studies, which is now Ruby Hall, was intended as a residence for the sisters in training who were attending classes here. Like a lot of what happened in the Catholic Church, a lot of building went on of seminaries and convents and formation houses just before vocations collapsed. And so Catholic institutions end up with a lot of, not just here, but in Europe as well, a lot of large 1960s buildings that just were never utilized for their original purpose. 62, Regina Hall. 63, we purchased the building Willowbrook to be a residence for women. 64, St. Joseph the Worker Hall was built for men. Regina was originally a woman's dorm only. 66, the first big carriage house renovation, which I think is when it became a theater. And then the physical education building, which is now being rebuilt, 1969. Now that's a heck of a lot of expansion in a short time. Those of you working in advancement will appreciate what was done. Peter Wegge came in, he got a leave from Steelcase, became an advisor, and helped us raise a whole lot of money along with the director of development during this period. Now, what happens? Oh, we also added academic programs. Believe it or not, we had, well, Sister Diane's one of the graduates of the Masters in Religious Ed. We also had a Master's in History and a Master's in English, which, as I understand the story, were taken out when North Central visited and said the library was not really adequate to support these programs. All right, then, Sputnik. Okay, and then, good God, I mean, thank goodness many of you are younger, but think of that period between 1963, Kennedy's assassination, and 1974, Nixon's resignation, the thing we call the 60s. Vietnam, civil rights marches. assassinations. Everybody that we admired got killed, it seemed. The huge protest and division in the United States, 1968 culminating a lot of that in what must be certainly the worst year I've ever lived through, not personally, but as a citizen of this country. I hope we never, ever go through another 1968. But it happened. And I think what happened is just captured by these two pictures. Early 1960s on the left, you've got students dressed in skirts and ties signing up for classes. Late 60s, these are faculty, Mike Williams there on the lower right corner, Sister James Rao, and the professor is no longer here, Tom Edison, and Dr. Ruby in the tie behind him. You can tell something happened socially, culturally in the time period, even if you didn't live through it. It was just a huge decade of turmoil, 10 years of incredible unrest. At the same time, shortly before, during that period of the 60s, the changes Vatican II instituted impacted Catholicism and what would be the Catholic nature of the college pretty heavily. There were the liturgical changes, there was a shift in emphasis onto social justice. There was a liberalization and ecumenical outlook that was encouraged, and we might characterize it as a period of expansiveness or expansion. And it was at that time, I think, that the faculty as well, the numbers of Dominicans began to dwindle, though they were still very strong. And so more lay faculty come on, and we, I'm going to use the term professionalize the faculty in the sense that we were looking primarily at academic rather than religious credentials as hiring criteria. And Norb Ruby becomes the first lay president of the college and ruled for 18 years. 18 years of incredible change, and even more incredible of black budgets. Don't hear that too much anymore. It was in 1968 that the first layperson came onto the Board of Trustees, in addition to the Sisters of Marywood. Then the following year, several others, and 1969, Norb started a self-study, and that was part of his process, was to turn the college over every few years and throw all the pieces up in the air and see what landed and in what shape it landed. That was very much a part of the spirit of the times. And where will it go and how will we determine what the place is going to be? It was in the early 70s then that both the sisters and the college came to agree that they needed to be separate corporations. And so it's not till the early 70s that the Sisters of Marywood and the Aquinas College Board of Trustees become distinct. And now we are governed by a lay board, mostly lay board, of trustees. The prioress and a couple of other sisters from the Grand Rapids Dominicans are ex officio members of that board. So their presence is still there, but corporately they're not the owners of Aquinas College. We're on our own since about 1972. There wasn't much lay involvement before that. In the 1940s, there were business people advising on financial matters. In the 1950s, there was an Associates Council of Laymen, which did mainly public relations for the college. So this is a major shift away from religious governance to a lay board governance. And we survived. That's the word for the 60s, 70s, and into the 80s. Norb called us one of the invisible colleges, and he wrote a book with that title, The Survival of Invisible Colleges. During that period from the late 60s through the 1980s, over, I think, 400 or 500 colleges like us closed because of the competition from the growing community college movement and also the cheaper tuition of state universities. We survived. And Norb put out a template for that, which basically involved new programs. Innovation, where are markets that are not being tapped? And he started a continuing education focus that really lasted here into the 1990s before that number began to dwindle. But it consisted of like the Encore program, a brilliant idea. Think of all the women in the 1950s, early 60s who stopped their education, raised their family, and 20 years later were ready to go back and complete their bachelor's degree. It was a huge market. And so Encore tapped into that. The Career Action Program under Ralph Bennett, got people who were interested, adult learners interested in changing careers, coming back to Aquinas. It was during this period, I think, that the business program really took off. The Aquinas Institute for Religious Studies was popular for years, now gone. The Emeritus program, 30 years, is still here, now known as OLLI. See how we're reaching into groups that were untapped, and then those master's programs that were short-lived. So we survived, and every year the budget was in the black. If programs were not profitable within a year, Norb cut them. He didn't let them limp along. So he was, in some ways, I think, a very good. He and John O'Connor, who kept the purse strings, together worked as a team and helped the place survive. I should also mention the Ireland program in here as well. Directed study formats, master's programs in management, so on. We're constantly churning up new things. However, we got the in-the-black budget by deferred maintenance. Potholes, leaky roofs, roof repair meant putting a wastebasket underneath the drip, and again the living endowment when we had so many religious faculty members. Now here's where the topic of today comes back in. Along with national trends, we adopted a cafeteria-style curriculum. Students kind of pick and choose, you know. I don't know, man, I don't feel like doing calculus, like I'd rather do weaving. Oh, well, that's cool, go ahead. And so that was the 60s, right? And that's when, of course, the number of theology and philosophy credits began to ebb away. It was an exciting time because there was tremendous innovation, new courses, weren't doing the same old stuff, new combinations of courses, crossing academic disciplines. As I said, it was an expansive and very exciting period. Experimental. And then in the 70s, career focus, I think, became much more important. With market-driven courses. We always had to do market research before we started a new program. It wasn't just, okay, we'll print up letterhead and have another institute. It's let's do some market research. Is there a market out here for this stuff? And along with the times again, Catholicism becomes a much fuzzier term. What exactly do we mean by the statement that we're a Catholic colleges? Because even within the church, there's a lot of turmoil and confusion and disputatio, as Dominic would say, about what the word meant. And Norb kind of relentlessly kept going back to what do we want to be? What do we want to be? Harbor Springs 1, Harbor Springs 2, 1973, and again in 1980. Those of you who still have hangovers from those things can get aspirin at the health center. But it was an attempt to bring the whole community together to discuss what Aquinas College is going to be. Well, then Norb's retirement came in 1986, and Peter O'Connor was hired. And this is my interpretation of events, okay, but I think there's substantiation for it. Peter arrived, and suddenly all that deferred maintenance was no longer deferred. I mean, we had potholes filled that had been sitting there for 12 years. We had new roofs. We had God knows what all, wallpaper. We had new lighting fixtures. You name it, and it was just happening. And in 1988, we spent $6 million to purchase what's now the East Campus, what had been Reformed Bible College, purchasing about 17 new buildings and all the program houses that are now program houses along Woodward. He unveiled a master plan in 1989 that involved laying miles of fiber optic cable long before such stuff was popular. He wanted to build a suspension bridge across the ravine from Ruby Hall to here so that cars could drive in across the ravine. He planned a new library to be out on the Holmdene lawn. They added a $1.6 million tower to Alberta's Hall. And those of us who had been here during Norb's years are going, where's the money coming from? We didn't know. But nobody questioned because it was so cool after having wastebaskets under your leaky roof to have a real roof. Well, what happened? Child Development Center, and then we get a man in a hole. That's what that graphic is. Because what happened was there was a bust. It was a perfect storm. It was a perfect storm. The number of 18-year-olds declined dramatically during those years in the early 90s. So there was a baby bust. We just didn't have a pool, and we couldn't compete with the state college, community college, for admissions. There was a huge overextension of credit, which according to one of the board members at the time, a Dominican sister, was not authorized by the board. We had never had a line of credit like this. The president went to the bank, took out a line of credit without authorization, and way overextended us. So we ended up with huge debt service. At one time, I remember Paul Nelson presenting a budget. We had $1.2 million in interest on loans that had accumulated to pay each year. You could not pay that. Accounting oversights, 2 years in a row of $1 million. It was the big oops. Oh, we're $1 million short. We have $1 million less than we thought we had, 2 years in a row. Okay, the result was Peter O'Connor got a terrible back problem, took a medical leave, and then resigned from the college. And that's all I'm going to say, and Paul Nelson was named president of the college because, off the record or on the record, the board didn't think they could attract a candidate given the situation of the college. Now, Paul, I also believe, was the right man for the right time. He did a superb job of healing this community and leading us, as I used to say, leading us through the swamp. He would tell you how deep in the swamp you were, and then he had the leadership skills to say, now we're all going to get out of it together. But there were tough years. I remember Eileen Keefe saying, we used to have shrimp at receptions, and she said, I'm so damn sick of cheese. Can't we just get one shrimp? So the recovery had to happen, and Paul was named president, but he had some real unique challenges. He had that financial debt management. It was also the 90s, so we had to computerize. You could not computerize, and that's very capital intensive. At the same time, we kept the academic program going and had a general ed overhaul, and that's where eventually humanities first and then I&E came out of. Paul had to do some humiliating stuff. We had an $8 million campaign for a new library. People had donated substantial amounts of money for a new library. He had to call them and ask their permission to shift that money into debt service. And some of them said no. And of course, the library then put on hold until another decade. But we got through. Good news, bad news. Good news, enrollment continued to increase somehow, thanks to Paula and the gang over there in Ruby. The money drain got stabilized pretty well. And Peter Wege gave us $5 million worth of Steelcase stock before it went public. And we're not saying he had any knowledge of that was going to happen. The bad news was, of course, that there were no or few pay raises for us. The maintenance went on deferral again, and the Wege stock was held onto by the committee on investments, and it just went through the roof, and they held onto it, and they held onto it, and then it crashed. And then a couple of times during Harry Knopke's years, we had to dip into that money and pay off debt. So that wonderful gift decreased considerably. And when Paul retired, though, the college was apparently stable, or at least as stable as it could be given all that, and it was due to the worker bees and Paul's leadership that just got us through the way the sisters got us through the Depression. At the time, the mission statement was very broad and fuzzy, to get back to that topic. It was a Catholic Christian college that gave a liberal arts with a career orientation education to all and any who could benefit from that education regardless of race, creed, and so on. So it was very diffuse, unlike the 1950s where it was all implicit and very clear. It was very open. And of course, one of the problems with it was that many folks on campus felt it was trying to be all things to all people, and as a result, wasn't much of anything at all. It was kind of a non-branded thing or institution. Then came the Knopke years. And since many of us were here during those, I'm going to treat it rather shortly. But once again, we jumped into capital expansion. Two of these projects, Jarecki Center and Performing Arts, had begun under Paul and under Harry were completed. And then the library project that opened in 2006. We had Harry creating institutes and spin-offs like the Woodrick Institute and Conductive Education. And all of this combined led to another financial crisis. And that's about where we come in 2007. Now, the revised mission statement, to finish up with this piece of the program. As it stands today, we're an inclusive educational community rooted in the Dominican tradition and providing a liberal arts education with a global perspective, emphasizing career preparation focused on leadership and service to others, fostering a commitment to lifelong learning, and dedicated to the pursuit of truth and the common good, and all of that on a shoestring budget. But it's a lot of stuff to try to do. But that's who at the moment we think we are. Now what I'd like to do is move us into phase 3 in a few minutes to give us something to think about for the rest of the year, and then as Bob addresses us in a few minutes. If this is our past, let's look at the present and the future. I think we need to all be asking, regardless of where we are in the institution, a few questions. Who are we? We know what our mission statement says, but what exactly do those terms mean when we try to operationalize them? And where do we want to go from now into the future? And why? If we don't know why we're going there, if we're just kind of flailing around creating new programs, I don't think that's a very good use of energy or money. And how does each of us fit in to the bigger thing we call Aquinas College? If there are many Aquinas Colleges, I want to try to get you to think globally for a moment, as though you're hovering above wherever your office is and looking at the whole institution. And to do that, I want to present what I think over the years in many mission statements and no mission statements we have agreed on, and that is the Dominican charisms. Obviously, as a college, we are engaged in study, but it's not just study, and it's not just career preparation. It's study that, and an atmosphere that encourages you to look at the spiritual dimension of life. We have founded a community, and if you've ever worked at an institution without a community, you'll feel the difference when you walk on this campus. Sister Diane mentioned a couple of those, the collegiality, the sharing, the facts that we talk across departments, discipline lines, that we do things together, that we support one another in times of crisis. That doesn't happen everywhere. And finally, service, going all the way back as far as you can go in the history of the place. We have served the greater community and have had an attitude of service towards one another and towards our students. Now, how you operationalize all that, I think, is a political question. But the philosophical question is this what we're about? And I think the answer is yes. You may pray differently than I do, but we all acknowledge the need for a spiritual dimension of life and try to define that. So what we try to do, what do we make? I was up with a bunch of guys fishing once, and they were talking about their companies. Oh, yeah, we make millwork over there in Holland at this company, and oh, yeah, my company makes this, that, and the other thing. They looked at me and said, what do you make? And I said, I make people think. But it's not just that. When Paul was director of student development, he used to ask us, what business are we in? And I think what we finally came up with is we are in the business of helping individuals grow in a holistic way. That is, we tend to the intellectual, spiritual, emotional, physical, and professional development of our students and of one another. And that's our real goal. And how we achieve that, I think, I'm going to suggest a way for you to think about what you do here. Each of us may have charge of or primary responsibility for one of those points of the Pentagon. And we create an environment in which that kind of growth can happen. So, for example, intellectual environment of the college. And if I miss any department, I'm sorry, we're all involved in this, though. But we have several environments. There's an intellectual environment, which includes the faculty, the library, the student support services, career counseling, registrar, advising, anyone working on the brains of the students, if you will. And we need to find ways to make that environment rich and productive for the students. We also create a spiritual environment, and the primary, but not only, responsibility for that is headed by campus ministry and its team, and the service learning people and all of that, and the way that we conduct meetings, the way we conduct our convocation and so on, is part of the spiritual environment that we strive to create. The physical environment, it's hard to work if the roof's leaking above your head. We create an environment of beauty and aesthetic pleasure, maintenance, housekeeping, campus safety creates a safe environment in which all this can take place. Residence life creates a home environment in the physical space of this campus. The community, how do we foster community here? I think there are certain branches of the college, all of us are involved in it, but certain ones more than others, sports, extracurriculars, student activity, residence life. How do we build those bonds of emotion that tie us together and keep us together? Then there's the business environment. We are a business. We try to keep the cash flow coming in and the expenses, under management and that sort of thing. And that environment is essential for any of the others to happen. And we have admissions, financial aid, business office advancement, and so on. Now you may find yourself in a different space or think of yourself in a different way, and that's fine. But I think this is the whole picture, that we're trying to create all these kinds of environments in which the five-fold development of students can take place. And I think that's what we've been up to for the last 120 years. It's a kind of stewardship. Now, where do we go next? I think there are some important questions looming on the horizon, and I hope they're not building into major tensions, but they are questions that have to be addressed. One is who gets to define what Catholic means at Aquinas College? The current freshman class is under 60% who self-identify as Catholics. We don't ask staff or faculty what their religious affiliation is. So the ground is quite different than it was in the 1950s. And yet we have that word in our mission statement, and so who will be at the table as we decide what that means? How do we ensure the long-term financial future of this place? The brief sketch of the history I gave you showed that it's always been kind of touch and go, as it is with many institutions. We really want, after 100 years, for this place to become financially stable so that it's here 100 years from now. How can we build on the past? Like that shovel, what do we keep and what do we change and what do we improve to keep it feeling like Aquinas College, even as it changes? We can't become ossified, and we can't roll back the clock. Not that I would. The 1950s weren't that great for those of you that were around or weren't around back then. But how can we both conserve and innovate as we move? These are questions of values. And how do you and your department fit into the overall mission of this place? Freud said that what people need is love and work. And what he meant was meaningful relationships and meaningful work. Work that fits into a larger context that gives your life a sense of significance. I think we can have all of that here. What makes us different is that we're a community committed to the core values, which I'd identify as those four charism, and as we all know, work that makes a difference in the world where each one of us is needed.